Hey everybody, Mike Naso here from Internet Partnership Radio and podweather.com with the latest on the tropics. And it's been a while as we haven't really been able to talk because the tropics wound down pretty quickly, especially after Hurricane Igor, Julia, and Carl did their markings there in the Atlantic. We did have Lisa move out to sea. Matthew caused some heavy rainfall, and we had Nicole scrape the East Coast, causing more rain than Earl did. And then we had Hurricane Otto spin on out to sea. Now we have yet another hurricane, and the reason this is the first time you're hearing about Hurricane Paula here is because of the rapid generation of this from literally just an invest thunderstorm cluster into a strong hurricane. You can see the last few days as the system moved out of the southwest Caribbean at the beginning of this loop, it was nothing more than a tropical storm, and as it left Honduras, it quickly wrapped up an eye. However, it's not in a perfect environment for strengthening. You would think a small hurricane, at least 100 miles per hour, that tiny, that well defined, in that area of the Caribbean in mid October would be well on its way to category 4 or 5. That's not the case with Paula because of wind shear, and I will show you that in a bit. You can see us continue to move in the direction generally towards the Yucatan, and we do have those hurricane warnings up, including Cozumel. It is going to likely turn to the east, but will it do it in time? Right now it looks quite possible that there will be at the very least tropical storm and maybe even hurricane force gusts along areas of the Yucatan. After that is western Cuba, the Isle of Youth, perhaps even an impact on the Florida Keys and Bahamas down the road. We'll talk about all that as we continue to monitor Hurricane Paula. Now here's the latest on Hurricane Paula as of 8 p.m. Eastern Time, that's 7 p.m. Central. The eye of Paula was at 19.6 north, 86.0 west, and winds were 100 miles per hour, gusting to 120. So this is a strong hurricane. It's just very, very tiny. It's moving north at 9, and again it is expected to gradually bend east. You can see based on the track, this is the 5 p.m. forecast track with the 8 p.m. coordinates, and you can see with that current motion to the north, the track would have to make it move northwest again before turning back east. So if it's moving north already, it may be more on the right edge of this cone or more towards the middle in the longer run. If I were in South Florida, I'd be keeping an eye on Hurricane Paula, but right now it doesn't look like Paula is going to make a direct landfall. And if it did, by that time it'd probably be a heck of a lot weaker too. We wouldn't have to deal with an intense hurricane, at least not nearly as strong as it is now. You can see here's the wind field, and again, tropical storm force winds extend out just in that little area there, 15 miles for the hurricane force winds right there around the eye. That's where winds could be gusting as high as category 3 strength, and it is expected to make that move. It is moving now towards the north, which means that if it continued that and then bent to the east, the Yucatan, you guys might be spared even tropical storm force winds if the wind field stays this small, and definitely be spared hurricane force. But if it makes any deviation to the left, you guys, especially in the island of Cozumel, could get the worst of it. Regardless, western Cuba here, be making your preparations, because whatever buildup of water, wind, and hurricane force conditions Paula's building up now, there's nothing to stop that once it slams into western Cuba. It's not like a hurricane coming with a lot of storm surge from the Bahamas into South Florida and the storm surge breaks apart as it hits the islands. There's nothing there in areas of western Cuba with a direct hit coming like Paula will do over the next coming days. So again, we're going to have to watch that very carefully. The models, actually, a lot of them do show this ending up in South Florida, a lot of the ensembles. The rest of the models, you can see the H-Wharf takes it back due south, and obviously the GFDL model takes it over Cuba and out towards the Bahamas. You have the no gaps in here taking it up towards the Florida Keys and then back south over the Bahamas. Reason for that is weak steering currents. Right now indications are that things are really going to weaken for this hurricane steering wise, and it may be trapped. Generally though, somewhere in this area on this map, anywhere from the Yucatan to the Bahamas, South Florida, and Jamaica, that's the general vicinity of whatever Hurricane Paula is going to do as it makes that march towards landfall in Cuba and eventually towards areas of the Bahamas down the line. Now here's the latest satellite of Hurricane Paula, and you can see on the satellite imagery, clearly it's not as well organized as it tried to get earlier. It is having some trouble. The eye is right in here, and clearly it's very tiny, very ill-defined for being a hurricane of over 100 miles per hour, and weakening could occur if it doesn't change its shape soon. You can see earlier on the loop as it was spinning there, it started to look a little bit more impressive with the eye, but over the last few hours, whatever it was trying to spin out there has since weakened to that, and clearly the flow is in that direction, pushing the storm due north, and we're not seeing any indication of intensification. Now here's why. This is the latest wind shear map, and you can see there is a huge, and I do mean huge, area of favorability over the Caribbean. 5 knots of wind shear, 10 knots. If there was a hurricane, if Hurricane Paula, even a tiny storm like Paula, instead of being where it is here, was underneath this, there would be absolute intensification. The waters are so warm that with this type of upper level pattern, Paula would likely reach Category 5 intensity in a very short amount of time. As small as Paula is, as hot as those waters are, if it were underneath here, south of Kingston, Jamaica, you would be dealing with a Category 4, at the very least 155 mile an hour hurricane, probably a 5. But, it's a good but. Paula has a good but because it's over here. And that means that flow up and around that would ventilate a hurricane in this area is shearing Paula south to north up towards 20, 30, 40 knots, and it's only going to get worse through time. Now as the hurricane ends up bending to the right, the winds are going to get very unfavorable. It's going to be interacting with land, and weakening should ensue, but of course we're going to have to wait and see just how much the hurricane weakens before it hits western Cuba. So in the final analysis, you can see we have some cloudiness out there. Generally a quiet sky here across the Atlantic basin. Little thunderstorms down here not doing anything. Model runs are indicating we could have another hurricane, this one much more intense, moving generally closer to Florida and the Yucatan than Hurricane Paula was. And of course, we're so far down the name list that if that does become our next storm, that would be Hurricane Richard. So we'll wait and see on that, but you can see Hurricane Paula here sitting in the northwest Caribbean Sea, creeping north, expected to turn east and eventually move on east-northeast, but again it could be further west into the Yucatan and South Florida, or further east straight into Cuba in the area where Hurricane Paloma made landfall as a strong hurricane just 2 years ago. I'm Mike Naso from IPR with the latest on Hurricane Paula. I'll see you next time.